Letters of Oscar Wilde, Volume 2, 1890 to 1895. Exchange with the editor of the St. James's Gazette, 26th to 28th of June, 1890. From Oscar Wilde, Art and Morality, by Stuart Mason. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rob Marland. Mr. Wilde's Bad Case. To the Editor of the St. James's Gazette. Sir, I have read your criticism of my story, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and I need hardly say that I do not propose to discuss its merits and demerits, its personalities or its lack of personality. England is a free country, and ordinary English criticism is perfectly free and easy. Besides, I must admit that, either from temperament or taste, or from both, I am quite incapable of understanding how any work of art can be criticized from a moral standpoint. The sphere of art and the sphere of ethics are absolutely distinct and separate, and it is to the confusion between the two that we owe the appearance of Mrs. Grundy, that amusing old lady who represents the only original form of humour that the middle classes of this country have been able to produce. What I do object to most strongly is that you should have placarded the town with posters on which was printed in large letters, "Mr. Oscar Wilde's latest advertisement, a bad case." Whether the expression "a bad case" refers to my book, or to the present position of the government, I cannot tell. What was silly and unnecessary was the use of the term advertisement. I think I may say without vanity, though I do not wish to appear to run vanity down, that of all men in England I am the one who requires least advertisement. I am tired to death of being advertised. I feel no thrill when I see my name in a paper. The Chronicle does not interest me any more. I wrote this book entirely for my own pleasure, and it gave me very great pleasure to write it. Whether it becomes popular or not is a matter of absolute indifference to me. I am afraid, sir, that the real advertisement is your cleverly written article. The English public, as a mass, takes no interest in a work of art until it is told that the work in question is immoral, and your réclame will, I have no doubt, largely increase the sale of the magazine, in which sale, I may mention, with some regret, I have no pecuniary interest. I remain, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. 16 Tite Street, Chelsea, June 25th. To this the following editorial note was appended. In the preceding column will be found the best reply which Mr. Oscar Wilde can make to our recent criticism of his mawkish and nauseous story, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Mr. Wilde tells us that he is constitutionally unable to understand how any work of art can be criticized from a moral standpoint. We were quite aware that ethics and aesthetics are different matters, and that is why the greater part of our criticism was devoted not so much to the nastiness of The Picture of Dorian Gray, but to its dullness and stupidity. Mr. Wilde pretends that we have advertised it. So we have, if any readers are attracted to a book which, we have warned them, will bore them insufferably. That the story is corrupt cannot be denied, but we added, and assuredly believe, that it is not dangerous because, as we said, it is tedious and stupid. Mr. Wilde tells us that he wrote the story for his own pleasure, and found great pleasure in writing it. We congratulate him. There is no triumph more precious to your aesthete than the discovery of a delight which outsiders cannot share or even understand. The author of The Picture of Dorian Gray is the only person likely to find pleasure in it. Mr. Oscar Wilde again. Mr. Oscar Wilde continues to carry on the defence of his novelette, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Writing to us under yesterday's date, he says, "In your issue of today you state that my brief letter published in your columns is the best reply I can make to your article upon Dorian Gray. This is not so. I do not propose to discuss fully the matter here, but I feel bound to say that your article contains the most unjustifiable attack that has been made upon any man of letters for many years. The writer of it, who is quite incapable of concealing his personal malice, and so in some measure destroys the effect he wishes to produce, seems not to have the slightest idea of the temper in which a work of art should be approached. To say that such a book as mine should be chucked into the fire is silly. That is what one does with newspapers. Of the value of pseudo-ethical criticism in dealing with artistic work I have spoken already, but as your writer has ventured into the perilous grounds of literary criticism, I ask you to allow me, in fairness not merely to myself, but to all men to whom literature is a fine art, to say a few words about his critical method. He begins by assailing me with much ridiculous virulence, because the chief personages in my story are puppies. They are puppies. Does he think that literature went to the dogs when Thackeray wrote about puppydom? I think that puppies are extremely interesting from an artistic as well as from a psychological point of view. They seem to me to be certainly far more interesting than prigs, and I am of the opinion that Lord Henry Wotton is an excellent corrective of the tedious ideal shadowed forth in the semi-theological novels of our age. He then makes vague and fearful insinuations about my grammar and my erudition. Now, as regards grammar, I hold that, in prose at any rate, correctness should always be subordinate to artistic effect and musical cadence, and any peculiarities of syntax that may occur in Dorian Gray are deliberately intended, and are introduced to show the value of the artistic theory in question. Your writer gives no instance of any such peculiarity. This I regret, because I do not think that any such instances occur. As regards erudition, it is always difficult, even for the most modest of us, to remember that other people do not know quite as much as one does oneself. I myself frankly admit I cannot imagine how a casual reference to Suetonius and Petronius Arbiter can be construed into evidence of a desire to impress an unoffending and ill-educated public by an assumption of superior knowledge. I should fancy that the most ordinary of scholars is perfectly well acquainted with the Lives of the Caesars and with the Satyricon. The Lives of the Caesars, at any rate, forms part of the curriculum at Oxford for those who take the honour school of Literae Humaniores, and as for the Satyricon, it is popular even among pass-men, though I suppose they are obliged to read it in translations. The writer of the article then suggests that I, in common with that great and noble artist, Count Tolstoy, take pleasure in a subject because it is dangerous. About such a suggestion there is this to be said. Romantic art deals with the exception and with the individual. Good people, belonging as they do to the normal, and so commonplace, type, are artistically uninteresting. Bad people are, from the point of view of art, fascinating studies. They represent colour, variety, and strangeness. Good people exasperate one's reason. Bad people stir one's imagination. Your critic, if I must give him so honourable a title, states that the people in any story have no counterpart in life, that they are, to use his vigorous, if somewhat vulgar phrase, mere catchpenny revelations of the non-existent. Quite so. If they existed, they would not be worth writing about. The function of the artist is to invent, not to chronicle. There are no such people. If there were, I would not write about them. Life, by its realism, is always spoiling the subject matter of art. The superior pleasure in literature is to realize the non-existent. And finally, let me say this. You have reproduced, in a journalistic form, the comedy of Much Ado About Nothing, and have, of course, spoilt it in your reproduction. The poor public, hearing from an authority so high as your own that this is a wicked book that should be coerced and suppressed by a Tory government, will, no doubt, rush to it and read it. But, alas, they will find that it is a story with a moral, and the moral is this: all excess, as well as all renunciation, brings its own punishment. The painter Basil Hallward, worshipping physical beauty far too much, as most painters do, dies by the hand of one in whose soul he has created a monstrous and absurd vanity. Dorian Gray, having led a life of mere sensation and pleasure, tries to kill conscience, and at that moment kills himself. Lord Henry Wotton seeks to be merely the spectator of life. He finds that those who reject the battle are more deeply wounded than those who take part in it. Yes, there is a terrible moral in Dorian Gray, a moral which the prurient will not be able to find in it, but it will be revealed to all whose minds are healthy. Is this an artistic error? I fear it is. It is the only error in the book. The editor added to this letter, Mr. Oscar Wilde may perhaps be excused for being angry at the remarks which we allowed ourselves to make concerning the moral tale of the three puppies and the magic picture, but he should not misrepresent us. He says we suggested that his novel was a wicked book which should be coerced and suppressed by a Tory government. We did nothing of the kind. The authors of books of much less questionable character have been proceeded against by the Treasury or the Vigilance Society, but we expressly said that we hoped Mr. Wilde's masterpiece would be left alone. Then Mr. Wilde, like any young lady who has published her first novel at the request of numerous friends, falls back on the theory of the critic's personal malice. This is unworthy of so experienced a literary gentleman. We can assure Mr. Wilde that the writer of that article had, and has, no personal malice or personal feeling towards him. We can surely censure a work which we believe to be silly, and know to be offensive, without the imputation of malice, especially when that book is written by one who is so clearly capable of better things. As for the critical question, Mr. Wilde is beating the air when he defends idealism and romantic art in literature. In the words of Mrs. Harris to Mrs. Gamp, "Who's denying of it?" Heaven forbid that we should refuse to an author the supreme pleasure of realizing the non-existent, or that we should judge the aesthetic from the purely ethical standpoint. No, our criticism starts from lower ground. Mr. Wilde says that his story is a moral tale, because the wicked persons in it come to a bad end. We will not be so rude as to quote a certain remark about morality which one Mr. Charles Surface made to Mr. Joseph Surface. We simply say that every critic has the right to point out that a work of art or literature is dull and incompetent in its treatment, as the picture of Dorian Gray is. and that its dullness and incompetence are not redeemed because it constantly hints, not obscurely, at disgusting sins and abominable crimes, as the picture of Dorian Gray does. Mr. Oscar Wilde's defence. To the editor of the St. James's Gazette. Sir, as you still keep up, though in a somewhat milder form than before, your attacks on me and my book, you not only confer upon me the right, but you impose on me the duty, of reply. You state, in your issue of to-day, that I misrepresented you when I said that you suggested that a book so wicked as mine should be suppressed and coerced by a Tory government. Now, you did not propose this, but you did suggest it. When you declare that you do not know whether or not the government will take action about my book, and remark that the authors of books much less wicked have been proceeded against in law, the suggestion is quite obvious. In your complaint of misrepresentation, you seem to me, sir, to have not been quite candid. However, as far as I am concerned, this suggestion is of no importance. What is of importance is that the editor of a paper like yours should appear to countenance the monstrous theory that the government of a country should exercise a censorship over imaginative literature. This is a theory against which I, and all men of letters of my acquaintance, protest most strongly, and any critic who admits the reasonableness of such a theory shows at once that he is quite incapable of understanding what literature is, and what are the rights that literature possesses. A government might just as well try to teach painters how to paint, or sculptors how to model, as attempt to interfere with the style, treatment, and subject matter of the literary artist, and no writer, however eminent or obscure, should ever give his sanction to a theory that would degrade literature far more than any didactic or so-called immoral book could possibly do. You then express your surprise that so experienced a literary gentleman as myself should imagine that your critic was animated by any feeling of personal malice towards him. The phrase literary gentleman is a vile phrase, but let that pass. I accept quite readily your assurance that your critic was simply criticizing a work of art in the best way that he could, but I feel that I was fully justified in forming the opinion of him that I did. He opened his article by a gross personal attack on myself. This, I need hardly say, was an absolutely unpardonable error of critical taste. There is no excuse for it except personal malice, and you, sir, should not have sanctioned it. A critic should be taught to criticize a work of art without making any reference to the personality of the author. This, in fact, is the beginning of criticism. However, it was not merely his personal attack on me that made me imagine that he was actuated by malice. What really confirmed me in my first impression was his reiterated assertion that my book was tedious and dull. Now, if I were criticizing my book, which I have some thoughts of doing, I think I would consider it my duty to point out that it is far too crowded with sensational incident, and far too paradoxical in style, as far, at any rate, as the dialogue goes. I feel that from a standpoint of art there are true defects in the book, but tedious and dull the book is not. Your critic has cleared himself of the charge of personal malice, his denial and yours being quite sufficient in the matter. But he has done so only by a tacit admission that he has really no critical instinct about literature and literary work, which, in one who writes about literature, is, I need hardly say, a much graver fault than malice of any kind. Finally, sir, allow me to say this. Such an article as you have published really makes me despair of the possibility of any general culture in England. Were I a French author, and my book brought out in Paris, There is not a single literary critic in France, on any paper of high standing, who would think for a moment of criticizing it from an ethical standpoint. If he did so, he would stultify himself, not merely in the eyes of all men of letters, but in the eyes of the majority of the public. You have yourself often spoken against Puritanism. Believe me, sir, Puritanism is never so offensive and destructive as when it deals with art matters. It is there that it is radically wrong. It is this Puritanism, to which your critic has given expression, that is always marring the artistic instinct of the English. So far from encouraging it, you should set yourself against it, and should try to teach your critics to recognize the essential difference between art and life. The gentleman who criticized my book is in a perfectly hopeless confusion about it, and your attempt to help him out by proposing that the subject matter of art should be limited does not mend matters. It is proper that limitation should be placed on action. It is not proper that limitation should be placed on art. To art belong all things that are and all things that are not, and even the editor of a London paper has no right to restrain the freedom of art in the selection of subject matter. I now trust, sir, that these attacks on me and my book will cease. There are forms of advertisement that are unwarranted and unwarrantable. I am, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. 16 Tite Street, S.W., June 27th. Once more the editor attempted to justify his reviewer's trenchant criticism. Mr. Oscar Wilde makes his third, and, we presume, his final reply to the criticism which we published on the picture of Dorian Gray. Somewhat grudgingly, but in sufficiently explicit terms, he withdraws the charge of personal malice which he brought against the critic, and which, we may again assure him, is absolutely unfounded. But he adheres to the other charge of critical incapacity. Mr. Wilde assures us that his book, so far from being dull and tedious, is full of interest, an opinion which is shared. See the letter we print on another page today, by his publisher's advertising agent in advance. Well, we can only repeat that we disagree with Mr. Wilde and his publisher's paragraphist. Quite apart from ethical considerations, the book seems to us a feeble and ineffective attempt at a kind of allegory which, in the hands of abler writers like Mr. Stevenson and Mr. Anstey, for instance, can be made striking or amusing. Mr. Wilde also says that we suggested that the author and publishers of The Picture of Dorian Gray ought to be prosecuted by the Tory government, by which we presume he means the Treasury. No, we consider that such prosecutions are ill-advised, and expressly suggested that such action ought not to be taken against a book which we believed to be rendered innocuous by the tedious and stupid qualities which the critic discovered and explained. Secondly, Mr. Wilde hints that the rights of literature include a right to say what it pleases, how it pleases, and where it pleases. This is a right not only not recognized by the law of the land, but expressly denied by penalties which have been repeatedly enforced. Then what does Mr. Oscar Wilde mean by talking about the rights of literature? We will not insult an artist who is, by his own account, unmoral, or supramoral, by suggesting that he means moral rights. But he tells us that limitations may be set on action, but ought not to be set on art. Quite so, but art becomes action when the work of art is published. It is offensive publications that we object to, not the offensive imaginings of such minds as find their pleasure therein. Letter from a London editor. In the same issue of June 28th appeared the following letter. To the editor of the St. James's Gazette. Sir, if Mr. Oscar Wilde is the last man in England, according to his own account, who requires advertisement, his friends and publishers do not seem to be of the same opinion. Otherwise it is difficult to account for the following audacious puff positive, which has been sent through the halfpenny post to newspaper editors and others. Mr. Oscar Wilde will contribute to the July number of Lippincott's magazine a complete novel entitled The Picture of Dorian Gray, which, as the first venture in fiction of one of the most prominent personalities and artistic influences of the day, will be everywhere read with wide interest and curiosity. But the story is in itself so strong and strange, and so picturesque and powerful in style, that it must inevitably have created a sensation in the literary world, even if published without Mr. Wilde's name on the title page. Viewed merely as a romance, it is, from the opening paragraph down to the tragic and ghastly climax, full of strong and sustained interest. As a study in psychology it is phenomenal. Judged even purely as a piece of literary workmanship, it is one of the most brilliant and remarkable productions of the year. Such, sir, is the estimate of Mr. Wilde's publishers or paragraph writer. Note the adjectival exuberance of the puffer. Complete, strong, strange, picturesque, powerful, tragic, ghastly, sustained, phenomenal, brilliant, and remarkable. For a man who does not want advertisement, this is not bad. I am, sir, your obedient servant, June 27th, a London editor. Mr. Oscar Wilde's defence. To the editor of the St. James's Gazette. Sir, in your issue of this evening you publish a letter from a London editor, which clearly insinuates in the last paragraph that I have in some way sanctioned the circulation of an expression of opinion on the part of the proprietors of Lippincott's magazine of the literary and artistic value of my story of The Picture of Dorian Gray. Allow me, sir, to state that there are no grounds for this insinuation. I was not aware that any such document was being circulated, and I have written to the agents, Messrs. Ward and Locke, who cannot, I feel sure, be primarily responsible for its appearance, to ask them to withdraw it at once. No publisher should ever express an opinion of the value of what he publishes. That is a matter entirely for the literary critic to decide. I must admit, as one to whom contemporary literature is constantly submitted for criticism, that the only thing that ever prejudices me against a book is the lack of literary style. But I can quite understand how any ordinary critic would be strongly prejudiced against a work that was accompanied by a premature and unnecessary panegyric from the publisher. A publisher is simply a useful middleman. It is not for him to anticipate the verdict of criticism. I may, however, while expressing my thanks to the London editor for drawing my attention to this, I trust, purely American method of procedure, venture to differ from him in one of his criticisms. He states that he regards the expression complete, as applied to a story, as a specimen of the adjectival exuberance of the puffer. Here it seems to me he sadly exaggerates. What my story is an interesting problem. What my story is not is a novelette, a term which you have more than once applied to it. There is no such word in the English language as novelette. It should not be used. It is merely part of the slang of Fleet Street. In another part of your paper, sir, you state that I received your assurance of the lack of malice in your critic somewhat grudgingly. This is not so. I frankly said that I accepted that assurance quite readily, and that your own denial and that of your critic were sufficient. Nothing more generous could have been said. What I did feel was that you saved your critic from the charge of malice by convicting him of the unpardonable crime of lack of literary instinct. I still feel that. To call my book an ineffective attempt at allegory that, in the hands of Mr. Anstey, might have been made striking, is absurd. Mr. Anstey's sphere in literature and my sphere are different. You then gravely ask me what rights I imagine literature possesses. That is really an extraordinary question for the editor of a newspaper such as yours to ask. The rights of literature, sir, are the rights of intellect. I remember once hearing Monsieur Renard say that he would sooner live under a military despotism than under the despotism of the Church, because the former merely limited the freedom of action, while the latter limited the freedom of mind. You say that a work of art is a form of action. It is not. It is the highest mode of thought. In conclusion, sir, let me ask you not to force on me this continued correspondence by daily attacks. It is a trouble and a nuisance. As you assailed me first, I have a right to the last word. Let that last word be the present letter, and leave my book, I beg you, to the immortality that it deserves. I am, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. 16 Tite Street, S.W., June 28th. The last word. We should be sorry to deny the ex-editor of the Woman's World the feminine privilege of the last word for which he pleads today. At the same time, we cannot admit that we force upon Mr. Wilde the burden of a newspaper controversy by daily attacks. Mr. Wilde published a book, and, presumably, submitted it to criticism. We exercised our rights as critics of contemporary literature by pointing out that we thought the book feeble and offensive. Mr. Wilde replies, defending his book against our unfavourable criticism, and we have again the right to point out that we do not consider that he has satisfactorily met our arguments and our objections. For the rest, we are quite willing to leave the picture of Dorian Gray to the immortality it deserves. We must add one word. We congratulate Mr. Wilde on his emphatic disavowal of the ridiculous puff preliminary which his publishers had chosen to circulate. End of section. To the Editor of the Daily Chronicle, 2nd of July, 1890. From Oscar Wilde, Art and Morality by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Oscar Wilde's reply. Dorian Gray. To the Editor of the Daily Chronicle. Sir, will you allow me to correct some errors into which your critic has fallen in his review of my story, The Picture of Dorian Gray, published in today's issue of your paper? Your critic states, to begin with, that I make desperate attempts to vamp up a moral in my story. Now I must candidly confess that I do not know what vamping is. I see from time to time mysterious advertisements in the newspapers about how to vamp, but what vamping really means remains a mystery to me, a mystery that, like all other mysteries, I hope some day to explore. However, I do not propose to discuss the absurd terms used by modern journalism. What I want to say is that, so far from wishing to emphasize any moral in my story, the real trouble I experienced in writing the story was that of keeping the extremely obvious moral subordinate to the artistic and dramatic effect. When I first conceived the idea of a young man selling his soul in exchange for eternal youth, an idea that is old in the history of literature, but to which I have given new form, I felt that, from an aesthetic point of view, it would be difficult to keep the moral in its proper secondary place, and even now I do not feel quite sure that I have been able to do so. I think the moral, too, apparent. When the book is published in a volume, I hope to correct this defect. As for what the moral is, your critic states that it is this, that when a man feels himself becoming too angelic, he should rush out and make a beast of himself. I cannot say that I consider this a moral. The real moral of the story is that all excess, as well as all renunciation, brings its punishment, and this moral is so far artistically and deliberately suppressed that it does not enunciate its law as a general principle, but realizes itself purely in the lives of individuals, and so becomes simply a dramatic element in a work of art, and not the object of the work of art itself. Your critic also falls into error when he says that Dorian Gray, having a cool, calculating, conscienceless character, was inconsistent when he destroyed the picture of his own soul, on the ground that the picture did not become less hideous after he had done what, in his vanity, he had considered his first good action. Dorian Gray has not got a cool, calculating, conscienceless character at all. On the contrary, he is extremely impulsive, absurdly romantic, and is haunted all through his life by an exaggerated sense of conscience which mars his pleasures for him and warns him that youth and enjoyment are not everything in the world. It is finally to get rid of the conscience that had dogged his steps from year to year that he destroys the picture, and thus, in his attempt to kill conscience, Dorian Gray kills himself. Your critic then talks about obtrusively cheap scholarship. Now, whatever a scholar writes is sure to display scholarship in the distinction of style and the fine use of language. But my story contains no learned or pseudo-learned discussions, and the only literary books that it alludes to are books that any fairly educated reader may be supposed to be acquainted with, such as the Satyricon of Petronius Arbiter, or Gautier's Mots et Camées. Such books as Le Conso's Clericalis Disciplina belong not to culture, but to curiosity. Anybody may be excused for not knowing them. Finally, let me say this. The aesthetic movement produced certain curious colours, subtle in their loveliness and fascinating in their almost mystical tone. They were, and are, our reaction against the crude primaries of a doubtless more respectable, but certainly less cultivated age. My story is an essay on decorative art. It reacts against the crude brutality of plain realism. It is poisonous, if you like, but you cannot deny that it is also perfect, and perfection is what we artists aim at. I remain, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. 16 Tite Street, June 30th. End of section. Exchange with the editor of the Scots Observer. From Oscar Wilde, Art and Morality by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 16 Tite Street, Chelsea, 9th of July, 1890. Sir, you have published a review of my story, The Picture of Dorian Gray. As this review is grossly unjust to me as an artist, I ask you to allow me to exercise in your columns my right of reply. Your reviewer, sir, while admitting that the story in question is plainly the work of a man of letters, the work of one who has brains and art and style, yet suggests, and apparently in all seriousness, that I have written it in order that it should be read by the most depraved members of the criminal and illiterate classes. Now, sir, I do not suppose that the criminal and illiterate classes ever read anything except newspapers. They are certainly not likely to be able to understand anything of mine. So let them pass, and on the broad question of why a man of letters writes at all, let me say this. The pleasure that one has in creating a work of art is a purely personal pleasure, and it is for the sake of this pleasure that one creates. The artist works with his eye on the object. Nothing else interests him. What people are likely to say does not even occur to him. He is fascinated by what he has in hand. He is indifferent to others. I write because it gives me the greatest possible artistic pleasure to write. If my work pleases the few, I am gratified. If it does not, it causes me no pain. As for the mob, I have no desire to be a popular novelist. It is far too easy. Your critic, then, sir, commits the absolutely unpardonable crime of trying to confuse the artist with his subject matter. For this, sir, there is no excuse at all. Of one who is the greatest figure in the world's literature since Greek days, Keats remarked that he had as much pleasure in conceiving the evil as he had in conceiving the good. Let your reviewer, sir, consider the bearings of Keats' criticism, for it is under these conditions that every artist works. One stands remote from one's subject matter. One creates it, and one contemplates it. The further away the subject matter is, the more freely can the artist work. Your reviewer suggests that I do not make it sufficiently clear whether I prefer virtue to wickedness or wickedness to virtue. An artist, sir, has no ethical sympathies at all. Virtue and wickedness are to him simply what the colours on his palette are to the painter. They are no more, and they are no less. He sees that by their means a certain artistic effect can be produced, and he produces it. Iago may be morally horrible, and Imogen stainlessly pure. Shakespeare, as Keats said, had as much delight in creating the one as he had in creating the other. It was necessary, sir, for the dramatic development of this story, to surround Dorian Gray with an atmosphere of moral corruption. Otherwise the story would have had no meaning, and the plot no issue. To keep this atmosphere vague and indeterminate and wonderful was the aim of the artist who wrote the story. I claim, sir, that he has succeeded. Each man sees his own sin in Dorian Gray. What Dorian Gray's sins are, no one knows. He who finds them has brought them. In conclusion, sir, let me say how really deeply I regret that you should have permitted such a notice, as the one I feel constrained to write on, to have appeared in your paper. That the editor of the St. James's Gazette should have employed Caliban as his art critic was possibly natural. The editor of the Scots Observer should not have allowed Thersites to make mows in his reviews. It is unworthy of so distinguished a man of letters. I am, etc., Oscar Wilde. To this letter the following editorial note was added. It was not to be expected that Mr. Wilde would agree with his reviewer as to the artistic merit of his booklet. Let it be conceded to him that he has succeeded in surrounding his hero with such an atmosphere as he describes. This is his reward. It is none the less legitimate for a critic to hold and to express the opinion that no treatment, however skilful, can make the atmosphere tolerable to his readers. That is his punishment. No doubt it is the artist's privilege to be nasty, but he must exercise that privilege at his peril. During the next 2 weeks, various correspondents aired their views on the subject, and in the 3rd week Oscar Wilde replied to them thus. Sir, in a letter dealing with the relations of art to morals, published in your columns, a letter which I may say seems to me in many respects admirable, especially in its insistence on the right of the artist to select his own subject matter, Mr. Charles Whibley suggests that it must be peculiarly painful to me to find that the ethical import of Dorian Gray has been so strongly recognized by the foremost Christian papers of England and America that I have been greeted by more than one of them as a moral reformer. Allow me, sir, to reassure on this point not merely Mr. Charles Whibley himself, but also your, no doubt, anxious readers. I have no hesitation in saying that I regard such criticisms as a very gratifying tribute to my story, for if a work of art is rich and vital and complete, those who have artistic instincts will see its beauty, and those to whom ethics appeal more strongly than aesthetics will see its moral lesson. It will fill the cowardly with terror, and the unclean will see in it their own shame. It will be to each man what he is himself. It is the spectator, and not life, that art really mirrors. And so, in the case of Dorian Gray, the purely literary critic, as in The Speaker and elsewhere, regards it as a serious and fascinating work of art. The critic who deals with art in its relation to conduct, as the Christian leader and the Christian world, regards it as an ethical parable. Light, which I am told is the organ of the English mystics, regards it as a work of high spiritual import. The St. James's Gazette, which is seeking apparently to be the organ of the prurient, sees, or pretends to see in it, all kinds of dreadful things, and hints at Treasury prosecutions. And your Mr. Charles Whibley genially says that he discovers in it lots of morality. It is quite true that he goes on to say that he detects no art in it, but I do not think that it is fair to expect a critic to be able to see a work of art from every point of view. Even Gautier had his limitations, just as much as Diderot had, and in modern England Goethes are rare. I can only assure Mr. Charles Whibley that no moral apotheosis to which he has added the most modest contribution could possibly be a source of unhappiness to an artist. I remain, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. This again led to further correspondence, and after an interval of 2 weeks Oscar Wilde returned to the charges levelled against his book, and replied for the third and last time. His letter, dated from 16 Tite Street, Chelsea, 13th August 1890, was as follows. Sir, I am afraid I cannot enter into any newspaper discussion on the subject of art with Mr. Whibley, partly because the writing of letters is always a trouble to me, and partly because I regret to say that I do not know what qualifications Mr. Whibley possesses for the discussion of so important a topic. I merely noticed his letter because, I am sure without in any way intending it, he made a suggestion about myself personally that was quite inaccurate. His suggestion was that it must have been painful to me to find that a certain section of the public, as represented by himself and the critics of some religious publications, had insisted on finding what he calls lots of morality in my story of The Picture of Dorian Gray. Being naturally desirous of setting your readers right on a question of such vital interest to the historian, I took the opportunity of pointing out in your columns that I regarded all such criticisms as a very gratifying tribute to the ethical beauty of the story, and I added that I was quite ready to recognize that it was not really fair to ask of any ordinary critic that he should be able to appreciate a work of art from every point of view. I still hold this opinion. If a man sees the artistic beauty of a thing, he will probably care very little for its ethical import. If his temperament is more susceptible to ethical than to aesthetic influences, he will be blind to questions of style, treatment, and the like. It takes a Goethe to see a work of art fully, completely, and perfectly, and I thoroughly agree with Mr. Whibley when he says that it is a pity that Goethe never had an opportunity of reading Dorian Gray, I feel quite certain that he would have been delighted by it, and I only hope that some ghostly publisher is even now distributing shadowy copies in the Elysian fields, and that the cover of Goethe's copy is powdered with gilt asphodels. You may ask me, sir, why I should care to have the ethical beauty of my story recognized. I answer, simply because it exists, because the thing is there. The chief merit of Madame Bovary is not the moral lesson that can be found in it, any more than the chief merit of Salammbô is its archaeology. But Flaubert was perfectly right in exposing the ignorance of those who called the one immoral and the other inaccurate. And not merely was he right in the ordinary sense of the word, but he was artistically right, which is everything. The critic has to educate the public. The artist has to educate the critic. Allow me to make one more correction, sir, and I will have done with Mr. Whibley. He ends his letter with the statement that I have been indefatigable in my public appreciation of my own work. I have no doubt that in saying this he means to pay me a compliment, but he really overrates my capacity, as well as my inclination for work. I must frankly confess that by nature and by choice I am extremely indolent. Cultivated idleness seems to me to be the proper occupation for men. I dislike newspaper controversies of any kind, and of the 216 criticisms of Dorian Gray that have passed from my library table into the waste paper basket, I have taken public notice of only 3. One was that which appeared in the Scots Observer. I noticed it because it made a suggestion about the intention of the author in writing the book which needed correction. The second was an article in the St. James's Gazette. It was offensively and vulgarly written, and seemed to me to require immediate and caustic censure. The tone of the article was an impertinence to any man of letters. The third was a meek attack in a paper called the Daily Chronicle. I think my writing to the Daily Chronicle was an act of pure wilfulness. In fact, I feel sure it was. I quite forget what they said. I believe they said that Dorian Gray was poisonous, and I thought that, on alliterative grounds, it would be kind to remind them that, however that may be, it is, at any rate, perfect. That was all. Of the other 213 criticisms I have taken no notice. Indeed, I have not read more than half of them. It is a sad thing, but one wearies even of praise. As regards Mr. Brown's letter, it is interesting only in so far as it exemplifies the truth of what I have said above on the question of the 2 obvious schools of critics. Mr. Brown says frankly that he considers morality to be the strong point of my story. Mr. Brown means well, and has got hold of a half-truth, but when he proceeds to deal with the book from the artistic standpoint, he, of course, goes sadly astray. To class Dorian Gray with Monsieur Zola's La Terre is as silly as if one were to class Masset's Fortunio with one of the Adelphi melodramas. Mr. Brown should be content with ethical appreciations. There he is impregnable. Mr. Cobham opens badly by describing my letter setting Mr. Whibley right on a matter of fact as an impudent paradox. The term impudent is meaningless, and the word paradox is misplaced. I am afraid that writing to newspapers has a deteriorating influence on style. People get violent and abusive, and lose all sense of proportion when they enter that curious journalistic arena in which the race is always to the noisiest. Impudent paradox is neither violent nor abusive, but it is not an expression that should have been used about my letter. However, Mr. Cobham makes full atonement afterwards for what was, no doubt, a mere error of manner, by adopting the impudent paradox in question as his own, and pointing out that, as I had previously said, the artist will always look at the work of art from the standpoint of beauty of style and beauty of treatment, and that those who have not got the sense of beauty, or whose sense of beauty is dominated by ethical considerations, will always turn their attention to the subject matter and make its moral import the test and touchstone of the poem or novel or picture that is presented to them, while the newspaper critic will sometimes take one side and sometimes the other, according as he is cultured or uncultured. In fact, Mr. Cobham converts the impudent paradox into a tedious truism, and, I dare say, in doing so does good service. The English public likes tediousness, and likes things to be explained to it in a tedious way. Mr. Cobham has, I have no doubt, already repented of the unfortunate expression with which he has made his debut, so I will say no more about it. As far as I am concerned, he is quite forgiven. And finally, sir, in taking leave of the Scots Observer, I feel bound to make a candid confession to you. It has been suggested to me by a great friend of mine, who is a charming and distinguished man of letters, and not unknown to you personally, that there have been really only two people engaged in this terrible controversy, and that those two people are the editor of the Scots Observer and the author of Dorian Gray. At dinner this evening, over some excellent Chianti, my friend insisted that under assumed and mysterious names you had simply given dramatic expression to the views of some of the semi-educated classes of our community, and that the letters signed H were your own skilful, if somewhat bitter, caricature of the Philistine as drawn by himself. I admit that something of the kind had occurred to me when I read H.'s first letter, the one in which he proposed that the test of art should be the political opinions of the artist, and that if one differed from the artist on the question of the best way of misgoverning Ireland, one should always abuse his work. Still, there are such infinite varieties of Philistines, and North Britain is so renowned for seriousness, that I dismissed the idea as unworthy of the editor of a Scotch paper. I now fear that I was wrong, and that you have been amusing yourself all the time by inventing little puppets, and teaching them how to use big words. Well, sir, if it be so, and my friend is strong on the point, allow me to congratulate you most sincerely on the cleverness with which you have reproduced the lack of literary style which is, I am told, essential for any dramatic and lifelike characterization. I confess that I was completely taken in, but I bear no malice, and as you have, no doubt, been laughing at me up your sleeve, let me join openly in the laugh, though it be a little against myself. A comedy ends when the secret is out. Drop your curtain and put your dolls to bed. I love Don Quixote, but I do not wish to fight any longer with marionettes, however cunning may be the master hand that works their wires. Let them go, sir, on the shelf. The shelf is the proper place for them. On some future occasion you can relabel them and bring them out for amusement. They are an excellent company, and go well through their tricks, and if they are a little unreal, I am not the one to object to unreality in art. The jest is really a good one. The only thing that I cannot understand is why you gave the marionettes such extraordinary and improbable names. I remain, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. The correspondence continued for 3 weeks longer, but Oscar Wilde took no further part in it. End of section. To Clyde Fitch, from Oscar Wilde, Fragments and Memories by Martin Birnbaum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 16 Tite Street, Chelsea, N.W. Dear Clyde, Just a line to tell you how sorry I am that you have left town, and how much I shall miss you. When you return we must make merry over a flagon of purple wine, and invent new tales with which to charm the world. O.W. End of section. To an unidentified correspondent, 1890. From the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 340. Autograph letter signed. 4 pages, small quarto. 16 Tite Street, Chelsea, no date. 1890. Regarding his biography for a cyclopedia. It is difficult to write one's own life, but I have indicated the lines on which it may be treated. I have no claim to be regarded as a journalist, as all my work is literary criticisms. I notice books, not events, etc. End of section. To the editor of the Daily Telegraph, 3rd of February 1891. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Fashions in Dress. To the editor of the Daily Telegraph. Sir, with reference to the interesting article on men's dress and the fashions for next season that appears in today's issue of your paper, will you allow me to point out that the costume worn now by Mr. Wyndham in London Assurance might be taken as the basis for a new departure, not in the style, but in the colour of modern evening dress. The costume in question belongs to 1840 or 1841, and its charm resides in the fact that the choice of the colour of the coat is left to the taste and fancy and inclination of the wearer. Freedom in such selection of colour is a necessary condition of variety and individualism of costume, and the uniform black that is worn now, though valuable at a dinner party, where it serves to isolate and separate women's dresses, to frame them, as it were, still is dull and tedious and depressing in itself, and makes the aspect of club life and men's dinners monotonous and uninteresting. The little note of individualism that makes dress delightful can only be attained nowadays by the colour and treatment of the flower one wears. This is a great pity. The colour of the coat should be entirely for the good taste of the wearer to decide. This would give pleasure, and produce charming variety of colour effects in modern life. Another important point in Mr. Wyndham's very graceful and elegant costume is that the decorative value of buttons is recognized. At present we all have more than a dozen useless buttons on our evening coats, and by always keeping them black and of the same colour as the rest of the costume, we prevent them being in any way beautiful. Now, when a thing is useless, it should be made beautiful, otherwise it has no reason for existing at all. Buttons should be either gilt, as in Mr. Wyndham's costume, or of paste, or enamel, or inlaid metal, or any other material that is capable of being artistically treated. The handsome effect produced by servants' liveries is almost entirely due to the buttons they wear. Nor would these suggested changes be in any way violent, or abrupt, or revolutionary, or calculated to excite terror in the timid, or rage in the dull, or fury in the honest Philistine. For the dress of 1840 is really the same in design and form as ours. Of course the sleeves are tighter, and the cuffs turn each over them, as sleeves should be, and as cuffs should do. The trousers also are tighter than the present fashion, but the general cut of the dress is the same. It consists, as ours does, of tail-coat, open waistcoat, and trousers. Two other points may be noticed. The first is that the use of a frill to the shirt prevents the tediousness of a flat, polished surface of stiff linen, breaks it up very pleasantly, in fact. Modern English evening shirts are too monotonous. In France, or perhaps I should say in Paris, shirts are made much more charming than with us. The second point is the beauty and utility of the cloaks in which Mr. Wyndham and Mr. Arthur Bouchier make their appearance. They are dark in colour, as, on the whole, cloaks in constant service should be. Their folds are ample, picturesque, and comforting. Their bright-coloured linings are delightful and fanciful and gay. Their capes give warmth and suggest dignity, and serve to make the lines of the cloaks richer and more complex. A cloak is an admirable thing. Our nearest approach to it is the Inverness cape, which, when its wings are lined with black satin, is very charming in its way. Still it has, though not sleeves, yet sleeve openings. A cloak can be put on or thrown off far more easily. A cloak is also warmer, and can be wrapped round one if there is a chill wind. We must wear cloaks with lovely linings, otherwise we shall be very incomplete. The coat, then, of next season will be an exquisite colour note, and have also a great psychological value. It will emphasize the serious and thoughtful side of a man's character. One will be able to discern a man's views of life by the colour he selects. The colour of the coat will be symbolic. It will be part of the wonderful symbolistic movement in modern art. The imagination will concentrate itself on the waistcoat. Waistcoats will show whether a man can admire poetry or not. That will be very valuable. Over the shirt front, fancy will preside. By a single glance one will be able to detect the tedious. How the change is to be brought about it is not difficult to see. In Paris the Duc de Morny has altered the colour of coats. But the English dislike individualism. Nothing but a resolution on the subject, passed solemnly by the House of Commons, will do with us. Surely there are some amongst our legislators who are capable of taking a serious interest in serious things. They cannot all be absorbed in the county court collection of tithes. I sincerely hope that a motion of some kind will be brought forward on the question, and that the First Lord of the Treasury will assign some day for discussion of a topic that is of really national importance. When the motion has been agreed to, servants will, of course, be asked to dress as their masters do now. As a slight compensation to them, their wages should be increased, if not doubled. Of the moral value and influence of such a charming costume, I think I had better say nothing. The fact is that when Mr. Wyndham and Mr. Arthur Bouchier appear in their delightful dresses, they have been behaving very badly. At least Mr. Arthur Bouchier has, and Mr. Wyndham's conduct seems to me to justify some moral censure at any rate. But if one is to behave badly, it is better to be bad in a becoming dress than in one that is unbecoming. And it is only fair to add that at the end of the play Mr. Wyndham accepts his lecture with a dignity and courtesy of manner that can only result from the habit of wearing delightful clothes. I am, sir, your obedient servant, O. End of section. To the Editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, 27th of August, 1891. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Exhausting the Obvious. To the Editor of the Pall Mall Gazette. Sir, I have read with much astonishment the letter signed S. that appears in your issue of this evening, and hope that you will allow me to assure the writer of the letter, and the public in general, that there is no truth whatsoever in the statement made in one of my essays that Providence and Mr. Walter Besant have exhausted the obvious. The public need be under no misapprehension. One has merely to read the ordinary English newspapers and the ordinary English novels of our day to become conscious of the fact that it is only the obvious that occurs, and only the obvious that is written about. Both facts are much to be regretted. I remain, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. Albemarle Chambers, Piccadilly, August 27th. End of section. To the Editor of the Times, 25th of September, 1891. From Decorative Art in America, edited by Richard Butler Glynzer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Mr. Kipling and the Anglo-Indians, September 25th, 1891. To the Editor of the Times. Sir, the writer of a letter signed An Indian Civilian that appears in your issue of today makes a statement about me which I beg you to allow me to correct at once. He says that I have described the Anglo-Indians as being vulgar. This is not the case. Indeed, I have never met a vulgar Anglo-Indian. There may be many, but those whom I have had the pleasure of meeting here have been chiefly scholars, men interested in art and thought, men of cultivation. Nearly all of them have been exceedingly brilliant talkers, some of them have been exceedingly brilliant writers. What I did say, I believe in the pages of the 19th century, was that vulgarity is the distinguishing note of those Anglo-Indians whom Rudyard Kipling loves to write about, and writes about so cleverly. This is quite true, and there is no reason why Mr. Rudyard Kipling should not select vulgarity as his subject matter, or as part of it. For a realistic artist, certainly, vulgarity is a most admirable subject. How far Mr. Kipling's stories really mirror Anglo-Indian society, I have no idea at all, nor, indeed, am I ever much interested in any correspondence between art and nature. It seems to me a matter of entirely secondary importance. I do not wish, however, that it should be supposed that I was passing a harsh judgment on an important and in many ways distinguished class, when I was merely pointing out the characteristic qualities of some puppets in a prose play. I remain, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. End of section. To the Editor of the Speaker, 5th of December, 1891. From the Bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A House of Pomegranates. Sir, I have just, at a price that for any other English sixpenny paper I would have considered exorbitant, purchased a copy of the Speaker at one of the charming kiosks that decorate Paris, institutions, by the way, that I think we should at once introduce into London. The kiosk is a delightful object, and, when illuminated at night from within, as lovely as a fantastic Chinese lantern, especially when the transparent advertisements are from the clever pencil of Monsieur Chéret. In London we have merely the ill-clad news-vendors, whose voice, in spite of the admirable efforts of the Royal College of Music to make England a really musical nation, is always out of tune, and whose rags, badly designed and badly worn, merely emphasize a painful note of uncomely misery, without conveying that impression of picturesqueness which is the only thing that makes the spectacle of the poverty of others at all bearable. It is not, however, about the establishment of kiosks in London that I wish to write to you, though I am of opinion that it is a thing that the County Council should at once take in hand. The object of my letter is to correct a statement made in a paragraph of your interesting paper. The writer of the paragraph in question states that the decorative designs that make lovely my book, A House of Pomegranates, are by the hand of Mr. Shannon, while the delicate dreams that separate and herald each story are by Mr. Ricketts. The contrary is the case. Mr. Shannon is the drawer of dreams, and Mr. Ricketts is the subtle and fantastic decorator. Indeed, it is to Mr. Ricketts that the entire decorative design of the book is due, from the selection of the type and the placing of the ornamentation, to the completely beautiful cover that encloses the whole. The writer of the paragraph goes on to state that he does not like the cover. This is, no doubt, to be regretted, though it is not a matter of much importance, as there are only two people in the world whom it is absolutely necessary that the cover should please. One is Mr. Ricketts, who designed it. The other is myself, whose book it binds. We both admire it immensely. The reason, however, that your critic gives for his failure to gain from the cover any impression of beauty seems to me to show a lack of artistic instinct on his part, which I beg you will allow me to try to correct. He complains that a portion of the design on the left-hand side of the cover reminds him of an Indian club with a house-painter's brush on top of it, while a portion of the design on the right-hand side suggests to him the idea of a chimney-pot hat with a sponge in it. Now, I do not for a moment dispute that these are the real impressions your critic received. It is the spectator, and the mind of the spectator, as I pointed out in the preface to the picture of Dorian Gray, that art really mirrors. What I want to indicate is this. The artistic beauty of the cover of my book resides in the delicate tracing, arabesques, and massing of many coral red lines on a ground of white ivory, the colour effect culminating in certain high gilt notes, and being made still more pleasurable by the overlapping band of moss-green cloth that holds the book together. What the gilt notes suggest, what imitative parallel may be found to them in that chaos that is termed nature, is a matter of no importance. They may suggest, as they do sometimes to me, peacocks and pomegranates and splashing fountains of gold water, or, as they do to your critic, sponges and Indian clubs and chimney-pot hats. Such suggestions and evocations have nothing whatsoever to do with the aesthetic quality and value of the design. A thing in nature becomes much lovelier if it reminds us of a thing in art, but a thing in art gains no real beauty through reminding us of a thing in nature. The primary aesthetic impression of a work of art borrows nothing from recognition or resemblance. These belong to a later and less perfect stage of apprehension. Properly speaking, they are no part of a real aesthetic impression at all, and the constant preoccupation with subject matter that characterizes nearly all our English art criticism is what makes our art criticism, especially as regards literature, so sterile, so profitless, so much beside the mark, and of such curiously little account. I remain, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. Boulevard des Capucines, Paris. End of section. To the editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, 11th of December 1891. From The Bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To the editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, December 11th, 1891, page 2, Wilde sent the following letter in reply to a review published on November 30th, page 3. Sir, I have just had sent to me from London a copy of the Pall Mall Gazette, containing a review of my book, A House of Pomegranates. The writer of this review makes a certain suggestion, which I beg you will allow me to correct at once. He starts by asking an extremely silly question, and that is, whether or not I have written this book for the purpose of giving pleasure to the British child. Having expressed grave doubts on this subject, a subject on which I cannot conceive any fairly educated person having any doubts at all, he proceeds, apparently quite seriously, to make the extremely limited vocabulary at the disposal of the British child the standard by which the prose of an artist is to be judged. Now, in building this House of Pomegranates, I had about as much intention of pleasing the British child as I had of pleasing the British public. Mamillius is as entirely delightful as Caliban is entirely detestable, but neither the standard of Mamillius nor the standard of Caliban is my standard. No artist recognizes any standard of beauty but that which is suggested by his own temperament. The artist seeks to realize, in a certain material, his immaterial idea of beauty, and thus to transform an idea into an ideal. That is the way an artist makes things. That is why an artist makes things. The artist has no other object in making things. Does your reviewer imagine that Mr. Shannon, for instance, whose delicate and lovely illustrations he confesses himself quite unable to see, draws for the purpose of giving information to the blind? I remain, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. Boulevard des Capucines, Paris. The following extract may be an early draft of one of these letters. It is taken from the original manuscript and does not appear to have been published. To give form to one's dreams, to give shape to one's fancy, to change one's ideas into images, to express oneself through a material that one makes lovely by mere treatment, to realize in this material the immaterial ideal of beauty, this is the pleasure of the artist. It is the most sensuous and most intellectual pleasure in the whole world. The standards of others are matters of no importance whatsoever, and to suggest that I have builded the House of Pomegranates for a certain section of the community which, if it can read, certainly cannot write, is about as sensible as if one were to suggest that Corot painted silver and green twilights for the edification of the French president, or that Beethoven created the Sonata Appassionata in order to interest middle-aged stockbrokers, or that my friend Mr. Shannon, whose exquisite drawings in my book your critic admits he is unable to see, designs for the purpose of giving information to the blind. No artist recognizes any standard outside his own temperament, and the standard of the peasant, the stockbroker, the blind, and the child is not to be taken as a test by which the work of the artist is to be estimated. It has nothing whatsoever to do with him. It may be said that so great an artist as Hans Andersen wrote stories for the purpose of pleasing children. This, however, would be an error. Hans Andersen wrote to please himself, to realize his own sense of beauty, and as he deliberately cultivated that simplicity of style and method which is the result of a subtle and self-conscious art, there are many children who take pleasure in his stories. But his true admirers, those who really appreciate how great an artist he was, are to be found not in the nursery, but on Parnassus. Oscar Wilde. End of section. To the Editor of the Daily Telegraph, 19th of February 1892. From Decorative Art in America, edited by Richard Butler Geinser. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The relation of the actor to the play. To the Editor of the Daily Telegraph. Sir, I have just been sent an article that seems to have appeared in your paper some days ago, in which it is stated that, in the course of some remarks addressed to the Playgoers Club on the occasion of my taking the chair at their last meeting, I laid down as an axiom that the stage is only a frame furnished with a set of puppets. Now, it is quite true that I hold that the stage is to a play no more than a picture frame is to a painting, and that the actable value of a play has nothing whatsoever to do with its value as a work of art. In this century in England, to take an obvious example, we have had only two great plays. One is Shelley's Cenci, the other Mr. Swinburne's Atalanta in Calydon, and neither of them is in any sense of the word an actable play. Indeed, the mere suggestion that stage presentation is any test of a work of art is quite ridiculous. In the production of Browning's plays, for instance, in London and at Oxford, what was being tested was obviously the capacity of the modern stage to represent, in any adequate measure or degree, works of introspective method and strange or sterile psychology. But the artistic value of Strafford, or In a Balcony, was settled when Robert Browning wrote their last lines. It is not, sir, by the mimes that the muses are to be judged. So far, the writer of the article in question is right. Where he goes wrong is in saying that I described this frame, the stage, as being furnished with a set of puppets. He admits that he speaks only by report, but he should have remembered, sir, that report is not merely a lying jade, which I personally could readily forgive her, but a jade who lies without lovely inventions, a thing that I, at any rate, can forgive her never. What I really said was that the frame we call the stage was peopled with either living actors or moving puppets, and I pointed out briefly, of necessity, that the personality of the actor is often a source of danger in the perfect presentation of a work of art. It may distort, it may lead astray, it may be a discord in the tone of symphony. For anybody can act. Most people in England do nothing else. To be conventional is to be a comedian. To act a particular part, however, is a very different thing, and a very difficult thing as well. The actor's aim is, or should be, to convert his own accidental personality into the real and essential personality of the character he is called upon to impersonate, whatever that character may be. Or perhaps I should say that there are two schools of actors, the school of those who attain that effect by exaggeration of personality, and the school of those who attain it by suppression. It would take too long to discuss these schools, or to decide which of them the dramatist loves best. Let me note the danger of personality, and pass on to my puppets. There are many advantages in puppets. They never argue. They have no crude views about art. They have no private lives. We are never bothered by accounts of their virtues, or bored by recitals of their vices, and when they are out of an engagement they never do good in public, or save people from drowning, nor do they speak more than is set down for them. They recognize the presiding intellect of the dramatist, and have never been known to ask for their parts to be written up. They are admirably docile, and have no personalities at all. I saw lately, in Paris, a performance by certain puppets of Shakespeare's Tempest in Monsieur Maurice Boucher's translation. Miranda was the image of Miranda, because an artist had so fashioned her, and Ariel was true Ariel, because so had she been made. Their gestures were quite sufficient, and the words that seemed to come from their little lips were spoken by poets who had beautiful voices. It was a delightful performance, and I remember it still with delight, though Miranda took no notice of the flowers I sent her after the curtain fell. For modern plays, however, perhaps we had better have living players, for in modern plays actuality is everything. The charm, the ineffable charm of the unreal, is here denied us, and rightly. Suffer me one more correction. Your writer describes the author of the brilliant fantastic lecture on The Modern Actor as a protégé of mine. Allow me to state that my acquaintance with Mr. John Gray is, I regret to say, extremely recent, and that I sought it because he had already a perfected mode of expression, both in prose and verse. All artists in this vulgar age need protection, certainly. Perhaps they have always needed it. But the 19th century artist finds it not in prince or pope or patron, but in high indifference of temper, in the pleasure of the creation of beautiful things, and the long contemplation of them, in disdain of what in life is common and ignoble, and in such felicitous sense of humour as enables one to see how vain and foolish is all popular opinion and popular judgment upon the wonderful things of art. These qualities Mr. John Gray possesses in a marked degree. He needs no other protection, nor indeed would he accept it. I remain, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. London, February 19th. End of section. To the Editor of the St. James's Gazette, 27th of February, 1892. From Miscellanies by Oscar Wilde. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lady Windermere's Fan. An Explanation. St. James's Gazette, February 27th, 1892. To the Editor of the St. James's Gazette. Sir, allow me to correct a statement put forward in your issue of this evening, to the effect that I have made a certain alteration in my play in consequence of the criticism of some journalists who write very recklessly and very foolishly in the papers about dramatic art. This statement is entirely untrue and grossly ridiculous. The facts are as follows. On last Saturday night, after the play was over, and the author, cigarette in hand, had delivered a delightful and immortal speech, I had the pleasure of entertaining at supper a small number of personal friends, and as none of them was older than myself, I, naturally, listened to their artistic views with attention and pleasure. The opinions of the old on matters of art are, of course, of no value whatsoever. The artistic instincts of the young are invariably fascinating, and I am bound to state that all my friends, without exception, would have opinion that the psychological interest of the second act would be greatly increased by the disclosure of the actual relationship existing between Lady Windermere and Mrs. Merlin, an opinion, I may add, that had previously been strongly held and urged by Mr. Alexander. As to those of us who do not look on a play as a mere question of pantomime and clowning, psychological interest is everything, I determined, consequently, to make a change in the precise moment of revelation. This determination, however, was entered into long before I had the opportunity of studying the culture, courtesy, and critical faculty displayed in such papers as the Referee, Reynolds, and the Sunday Sun. When criticism becomes in England a real art, as it should be, and when none but those of artistic instinct and artistic cultivation is allowed to write about works of art, artists will, no doubt, read criticisms with a certain amount of intellectual interest. As things are at present, the criticisms of ordinary newspapers are of no interest whatsoever, except in so far as they display, in its crudest form, the Boeotianism of a country that has produced some Athenians, and in which some Athenians have come to dwell. I am, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. February 26th. End of section. To Monsieur X of the Gaulois, June 1892. From Decorative Art in America, edited by Richard Butler Glaenzer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Paris, the Abode of Artists, June 1892. To Monsieur X of the Gaulois. Sir, my resolution is deliberately taken. Since it is impossible to have a work of art performed in England, I shall transfer myself to another fatherland, of which I have long ago been enamoured. There is but one Paris, voyez-vous, and Paris is France. It is the abode of artists. Nay, it is la ville artiste. I adore Paris. I also adore your language. To me there are only two languages in the world, French and Greek. Here, in London, people are essentially anti-artistic and narrow-minded. Now, the ostracism of Salome will give you a fair notion of what people here consider venal and indecorous. To put on the stage any person or persons connected with the Bible is impossible. On these grounds the censorship has prohibited Saint-Saëns' Samson et Delilah and Massenet's Hérodiade. Racine's superb tragedy of Athalie cannot be performed on an English stage. Really, one hardly knows whether the measure is the more hateful or ridiculous. Of course, I do not deny that Englishmen possess certain practical qualities, but as I am an artist, those qualities are not those which I can admire. Moreover, I am not at present an Englishman, I am an Irishman, which is by no means the same thing. No doubt I have English friends to whom I am deeply attached, but as to the English, I do not love them. There is a great deal of hypocrisy in England, which you in France very justly find fault with. The typical Briton is Tartuffe, seated in his shop behind the counter. There are numerous exceptions, but they only prove the rule. Oscar Wilde. End of section. To Sydney, October 1892. From the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 341. Autograph letter signed. 4 pages, octavo. 16 Tite Street, October 1892. My dear Sydney, I enclose you tickets for Monday night. Your Ferdinand in the Duchess of Malfi was a really fine performance. End of section. To Lord Alfred Douglas. From Oscar Wilde, 3 Times Tried. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. My own boy, your sonnet is quite lovely, and it is a marvel that those red rose-leaf lips of yours should have been made no less for music of song than for madness of kisses. Your slim, gilt soul walks between passion and poetry. I know Hyacinthus, whom Apollo loved so madly, was you in Greek days. Why are you alone in London, and when do you go to Salisbury? Do go there to cool your hands in the grey twilight of Gothic things, and come here whenever you like. It is a lovely place. It only lacks you. But go to Salisbury first. Always with undying love, yours, Oscar. End of section. To Lord Alfred Douglas, from Some Letters of Oscar Wilde to Lord Alfred Douglas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Letter 1. Babbacombe Cliff, Babbacombe. My dearest Bosie, I have written to your man, and have received no reply from him, which is most annoying, as things are the wrong colour without gold to light them up. Are you working? I hope so. Do get a good grammar. I am rather unhappy as I can't write. I don't know why. Things are all wrong. Have you been writing lovely sonnets? I never got the spirit lamp, nor even a cheque. My charge for the sonnet is £300. Who on earth is the editor? He must be rented. I hear he is hiding at Salisbury. With best love, ever yours, Oscar. End of section. To an unidentified correspondent. From the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. An important letter referring to Lady Windermere's fan. Lot 339. Autograph letter signed. 4 pages, octavo. 16 Tite Street, London, no date. February 23, 1893. Recipient unknown. A New Yorker. Pray let me very sincerely thank you for your charming letter, and for your graceful praise of my play. The newspapers seemed to me not to understand the form or spirit of my work. The psychological idea that suggested to me the play is this. A woman who has a child, but never knows the passion of maternity, suddenly sees the child she has abandoned falling over a precipice. She rushes to rescue, and next day she feels... And so the fourth act is to me the psychological act, etc. End of section. To the Editor of the Times, 2nd of March, 1893. From the Bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To the Editor of the Times. Sir, my attention has been drawn to a review of Salome which was published in your columns last week. The opinions of English critics on a French work of mine have, of course, little, if any, interest for me. I write simply to ask you to allow me to correct a misstatement that appears in the review in question. The fact that the greatest tragic actress of any stage, now living, saw in my play such beauty that she was anxious to produce it, to take herself the part of the heroine, to lend to the entire poem the glamour of her personality, and to my prose the music of her flute-like voice, this was naturally, and always will be, a source of pride and pleasure to me, and I look forward with delight to seeing Madame Bernhardt present my play in Paris, that vivid centre of art, where religious dramas are often performed. But my play was in no sense of the words written for the great actress. I have never written a play for any actor or actress, nor shall I ever do so. Such work is for the artisan in literature, not for the artist. I remain, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. End of section. To Lord Alfred Douglas, from Oscar Wilde, 3 Times Tried. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Savoy Hotel, Victoria Embankment, London. Dearest of all boys, your letter was delightful, red and yellow wine to me, but I am sad and out of sorts. Bosie, you must not make scenes with me. They kill me, they wreck the loveliness of life. I cannot see you, so Greek and gracious, distorted with passion. I cannot listen to your curved lips saying hideous things to me. I would sooner— Here a word is indecipherable, but I will ask the witness. Footnote. The words which Mr. Carson could not read here were, I would sooner be rented than, etc. Rent is a slang term for blackmail. End footnote. Then have you bitter, unjust, hating. I must see you soon. You are the divine thing I want, the thing of grace and beauty, but I don't know how to do it. Shall I come to Salisbury? My bill here is £49 for a week. I've also got a new sitting-room. Why are you not here, my dear, my wonderful boy? I fear I must leave. No money, no credit, and a heart of lead. Your own Oscar. End of section. To Lord Alfred Douglas, from Some Letters from Oscar Wilde to Alfred Douglas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Letter 2. Dearest boy, we have only just finished Act 2. Don't wait. Order, of course, what you want. Lunch, 1:30 tomorrow at Albemarle. I do not rehearse tomorrow at all. Ever yours, Oscar. Letter 3. 16 Tite Street, S.W. My dear boy, no letter from you yet, but I hope to find a line when I go home. I lunched with Prince Trubetskoy and Mrs. Chandler this afternoon. He has done a lovely picture of her, and would do a beautiful one of you. I talked to him about you. He is going down to the Batterseas to finish his portrait of Cyril, but will be back in the autumn. You really must be painted, and also have an ivory statue executed. Willard, the actor, lunches with me on Thursday to talk business. I hope to lure him to give me some of The Gold the Griffin Guards in rude Armenia. Are you coming up on Wednesday? If so, do dine with me. Ever yours, Oscar. End of section. To Ada Leveson, from the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 315. Latter portion of an autograph letter signed, 4 pages. To Mrs. Leveson. Your sketch is brilliant, as your work always is, and Dorian Gray looks quite charming. It is quite tragic for me to think how completely he has been understood on all sides, etc. Lot 316. Autograph letter signed, 4 pages, 8vo. Brighton, no date. To Mrs. Leveson. Signed, Oscar. Dear Sphinx, I hope to be in London on the 15th. Will you be there? Your article in Punch, Dorian and I read with joy, and detected you, of course, before you sent it to me. Dorian has a child, and is not allowed to go out today. He is very sweet and beautiful, and looks like a narcissus, etc. End of section. To Read&Listen, from the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 322. Autograph letter signed. 4 pages, duodecimo. New Travellers Club, Piccadilly, no date. To Mrs. Leveson. Signed, Oscar. Dear Sphinx, any night next week except Monday I shall be cheered to come and dine with you. Of course, I sit next you. My friend is more golden than ever. If a card with Monsieur Dorian, Esquire, is found on your Porphyry Hall table, you will know who has called. He has ordered 50, all for you. Lot 323. Latter portion of an autograph letter signed, 2 pages, octavo. No place nor date. To Mrs. Leveson. Signed, Oscar. I am just told that here they're to be feasters on Tuesday. Do let me know, and all my other days of the week belong to you. How wilful and wonderful you are. End of section. To Frank, from the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 366. Autograph letter signed, 3 pages, small quarto. Brighton, no date. To dear Frank. I am staying down here. When I return I will let you know. So you are a confessed playwright now. I am so glad. You must tell me all about your work. Lot 367. Autograph letter signed, 4 pages, octavo, Goring-on-Thames. To my dear Frank. I never got your invitation, or would have answered yes in all known and unknown tongues. I go to Birmingham tomorrow for the night to see the first performance of the provincial company of my play. Lot 368. Autograph letter signed, 2 pages, octavo, Albemarle Club, no date. To my dear Frank. Sending him a seat for a first night. Lot 369. Autograph letter signed, 4 pages, octavo, Goring-on-the-Thames, no date. To my dear Frank. Thanks for your long and interesting letter. I don't approve of your having been in Manchester. Charming people should never be in Manchester. But Sunbury sounds delightful. I live in a Canadian canoe, the curves of which are of surpassing beauty. Etc. End of section. To Lord Alfred Douglas, from Some Letters from Oscar Wilde to Alfred Douglas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Letter 4. Saturday. My dear Bosie, thanks for your telegram which I got last night on my arrival from Jersey, where I had been for a night, on my way over, to see a performance of my play by Miss Ungard and the South Company. It was rather good, and I had a great reception from a crowded house. The Gerald Arbuthnot was excellent and very nice. I entertained the actors afterwards at supper. I am off to Goring now, to try and settle up things. I don't know what to do about the place, whether to stay there or not, and the servants are a worry. I went round to see Lane just now, but he is in Paris with Rothenstein. I hope you will get proofs soon. I suppose you're in Devon for your brother's marriage. Give him my best wishes. Ever yours, Oscar. End of section. To Lord Alfred Douglas. From Some Letters from Oscar Wilde to Alfred Douglas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Letter 12. My dearest boy, thanks for your letter. I am overwhelmed by the wings of vulture creditors, and out of sorts. But I am happy in the knowledge that we are friends again, and that our love has passed through the shadow and the night of estrangement and sorrow, and come out rose-crowned as of old. Let us always be infinitely dear to each other, as indeed we have been always. I hear Bobby is in town, lame and bearded. Isn't it awful? I have not seen him yet. Leslie Thompson has appeared. He is extremely anxious to devote his entire life to me. Tree has written a long apologetic letter. His reasons are so reasonable that I cannot understand them. A cheque is the only argument I recognize. Hare returns to town early next week. I am going to make an effort to induce him to see that my new play is a masterpiece, but I have grave doubts. This is all the news. How horrid news is! I think of you daily, and am always devotedly yours, Oscar. End of section. To the Editor of the Times, 16th of January 1894. From Miscellanies by Oscar Wilde. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The 13 Club. Times, January 16th, 1894. At a dinner of the 13 Club held at the Holborn Restaurant on January 13th, 1894, the chairman, Mr. Harry Furniss, announced that from Mr. Oscar Wilde the following letter had been received. I have to thank the members of your club for their kind invitation, for which, convey to them, I beg you, my sincere thanks. But I love superstitions. They are the colour element of thought and imagination. They are the opponents of common sense. Common sense is the enemy of romance. The aim of your society seems to be dreadful. Leave us some unreality. Do not make us too offensively sane. I love dining out, but with a society with so wicked an object as yours, I cannot dine. I regret it. I am sure you will all be charming, but I could not come, though 13 is a lucky number. End of section. To Ada Leveson, from The Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 332. Autograph letter signed. 2 pages, on card. 16 Tite Street, no date. To Mrs. Leveson, with addressed envelope. Signed Oscar. I have a Salome for you. When can I bring it to you? Have you seen the yellow book? It is horrid, and not yellow at all. End of section. To Lord Alfred Douglas. From Some Letters from Oscar Wilde to Alfred Douglas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Letter 5. 16 Tite Street, S.W. My dearest boy, your telegram has just arrived. It was a joy to get it, but I miss you so much. The gay gilt and gracious lad has gone away, and hate everyone else. They are tedious. Also, I am in the purple valleys of despair, and no gold coins are dropping down from heaven to gladden me. London is very dangerous. Writters come out at night and writ one. The roaring of creditors towards dawn is frightful, and solicitors are getting rabies and biting people. How I envy you under Giotto's tower, or sitting in the loggia looking at that green and gold god of Cellini's. You must write poems like apple blossoms. The Yellow Book has appeared. It is dull and loathsome, a great failure. I am so glad. Always, with much love, yours, Oscar. Letter 6. 16 Tite Street, S.W. My dearest boy, life here is much the same. I find a chastened pleasure in being shaved in Eyre Street. You are always inquired after, and sonnet-like allusions made to your gilt silk hair. I saw an emissary from Mansfield, the actor, this morning. I think of writing The Cardinal of Avignon at once. If I had peace, I would do it. Mansfield would act it splendidly. Max on cosmetics in the Yellow Book is wonderful. Enough style for a large school, and all very precious and thought out, quite delightfully wrong and fascinating. I had a frantic telegram from Edward Shelley, of all people, asking me to see him. When he came he was, of course, in trouble for money. As he betrayed me grossly, I, of course, gave him money and was kind to him. I find that forgiving one's enemies is a most curious, morbid pleasure. Perhaps I should check it. With love, ever yours, Oscar. End of section. To Ada Leveson, from the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 318. Autograph letter signed, 1 page, 8vo, 16 Tite Street, no date. To Mrs. Leveson. Signed, Oscar. Your letters are wonderful and delightful. Your feast was rose-like. Quite soon I hope to meet. Lot 319. Autograph letter signed, 1 page, 12mo, no place nor date. To Mrs. Leveson. Signed, O.W. Asking whether she will be disengaged for the evening. Lot 320. Autograph letter signed, 3 pages, 8vo, 16 Tite Street, no date. Hastily written in pencil. Signed, Oscar. Alas, dear Sphinx, I believe we are going to La Femme de Claude tonight, otherwise I would eat honey cake with you at Willie's. You are the only Sphinx. End of section. To Lord Alfred Douglas. From Some Letters from Oscar Wilde to Alfred Douglas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Letter 7. My own dear boy, I hope the cigarettes arrived all right. I lunched with Gladys de Grey, Reggie and Alec York there. They want me to go to Paris with them on Thursday. They say one wears flannels and straw hats and dines in the Bois. But, of course, I have no money, as usual, and can't go. Besides, I want to see you. It is really absurd. I can't live without you. You are so dear, so wonderful. I think of you all day long, and miss your grace, your boyish beauty, the bright sword-play of your wit, the delicate fancy of your genius, so surprising always in its sudden swallow flights towards north or south, towards sun or moon, and, above all, you yourself. The only thing consoles me is what the Sibyl of Mortimer Street, whom mortals term Mrs. Robinson, said to me. If I could disbelieve her, I would, but I can't. And I know that early in January you and I will go away together for a long voyage, and that your lovely life goes always hand in hand with mine. My dear wonderful boy, I hope you are brilliant and happy. I went to Bertie today, I wrote at home, then went and sat with my mother. Death and love seem to walk on either hand as I go through life. They are the only things I think of. Their wings shadow me. London is a desert without your dainty feet, and all the buttonholes have turned to weeds. Nettles and hemlock are the only wear. Write me a line and take all my love, now and forever. Always, and with devotion, but I have no words for how I love you, Oscar. Letter 8. 16 Tite Street, S.W. Dearest boy, I hope to send you the cigarettes, if Simmons will let me have them. He has applied for his bill. I am overdrawn £41 at the bank. It really is intolerable, the want of money. I have not a penny. I can't stand it any longer, but don't know what to do. I go down to Worthing tomorrow. I hope to do work there. The house, I hear, is very small, and I have no writing room. However, anything is better than London. Your father is on the rampage again. Been to Café Royal to inquire for us, with threats, etc. I think now it would have been better for me to have had him bound over to keep the peace. But what a scandal! Still, it is intolerable to be dogged by a maniac. When you come to Worthing, of course all things will be done for your honour and joy. But I fear you may find the meals, etc., tedious. But you will come, won't you? At any rate, for a short time, till you are bored. Ernesto has written to me begging for money. A very nice letter, but I really have nothing just now. What purple valleys of despair one goes through. Fortunately, there is one person in the world to love. Ever yours, Oscar. Letter 9. Letter number 2. Dearest Bosie, I have just come in from luncheon. A horrid, ugly Swiss governess has, I find, been looking after Cyril and Vivian for a year. She is quite impossible. Also, children at meals are tedious. Also, you, the gilt and graceful boy, would be bored. Don't come here. I will come to you. Ever yours, Oscar. Letter 10. The Haven, 5 Esplanade, Worthing. My own dearest boy, how sweet of you to send me that charming poem. I can't tell you how it touches me, and it is full of that light lyrical grace that you always have, a quality that seems so easy to those who don't understand how difficult it is to make the white feet of poetry dance lightly among flowers without crushing them, and to those who know is so rare and so distinguished. I have been doing nothing here but bathing and play-writing. My play is really very funny. I'm quite delighted with it, but it is not shaped yet. It lies in sibylline leaves about the room, and Arthur has twice made a chaos of it by tidying up. The result, however, was rather dramatic. I am inclined to think that chaos is a stronger evidence for an intelligent creator than cosmos is. The view might be expanded. Percy left the day after you did. He spoke much of you. Alfonso is still in favour. He is my only companion, along with Stephen. Alfonso always alludes to you as the Lord, which, however, gives you, I think, a biblical Hebraic dignity that gracious Greek boys should not have. He also says from time to time, Percy was the Lord's favourite, which makes me think of Percy as the infant Samuel, an inaccurate reminiscence, as Percy was Hellenic. Yesterday, Sunday, Alfonso, Stephen, and I sailed to Littlehampton in the morning, bathing on the way. We took 5 hours in an awful gale to come back. Did not reach the pier till 11 o'clock at night, pitch dark all the way, and a fearful sea. I was drenched, but was Viking-like and daring. It was, however, quite a dangerous adventure. All the fishermen were waiting for us. I flew to the hotel for hot brandy and water, on landing with my companions, and found a letter for you from dear Henry, which I send you. They had forgotten to forward it, as it was past 10 o'clock on a Sunday night. The proprietor could not sell us any brandy or spirits of any kind, so he had to give it to us. The result was not displeasing, but what laws! An hotel proprietor is not allowed to sell necessary harmless alcohol to 3 shipwrecked mariners, wet to the skin, because it is Sunday. Both Alfonso and Stephen are now anarchists, I need hardly say. Your new Sibyl is really wonderful. It is most extraordinary. I must meet her. Dear, dear boy, you are more to me than any one of them has any idea. You are the atmosphere of beauty through which I see life. You are the incarnation of all lovely things. When we are out of tune, all colour goes from things for me. But we are never really out of tune. I think of you day and night. Write to me soon, you honey-haired boy. I am always devotedly yours, Oscar. Letter 11. The Haven, 5 Esplanade, Worthing. My own dear boy, your sweet letter arrived this morning, and this moment I have received your delightful telegram. Delightful because I love you to think of me. What do you think of 3 days at Dieppe? I have a sort of longing for France, and with you, if you can manage to come. I could only arrange 3 days, as I am so busy. I went yesterday up to town for the afternoon, lunched with George Alexander at the Garrick, got a little money from him, and returned by the 4:30 for dinner, so I can pay my rent, and Cyril's, little wretch and darling, school fees. I dare not lodge the money in the bank, as I have overdrawn £40, but I think of hiding gold in the garden. Could you meet me at Newhaven on the 15th? Dieppe is very amusing and bright. Or would you come down here first, say on Thursday, and we could go on? I saw Gatby by chance as I was driving through Pall Mall. He stopped my cab. We had a long chat. About you, of course. He is one of your many admirers. Last night, see other letter, you and I and the mayor figured as patrons of the entertainment given by the vagabond singers of the sands. They told me that our names, which have been placarded all over the town, excited great enthusiasm, and certainly the hall was crammed. I was greeted with loud applause as I entered with Cyril. Cyril was considered to be you. Dear boy, this is a scrawl, is it not? I find farcical comedies admirable for style, but fatal to handwriting. Do write to me, and do come to France. Is Basil here? If so, of course, come here. With fondest love, ever devotedly, yours, Oscar. End of section. Lord Alfred Douglas to the Marquis of Queensberry, August 1894. From the Leeds Mercury, 18th of April 1913. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Witness admitted that he wrote to his father in August 1894, I write to inform you that I treat your absurd threats with absolute indifference. You have disowned me at least a dozen times, and have meanly deprived me of money. You have therefore no right over me, legal or moral. If O.W. was to prosecute you in the criminal courts for libel, you would get 7 years' penal servitude for your outrageous libels. Much as I detest you, I am anxious to avoid this for the sake of the family. But if you try to assault me, I shall defend myself with a loaded revolver, which I always carry. And if I shoot you, or he shoots you, we should be completely justified, as we should be acting in self-defence against a violent and dangerous end, and I think if you were dead, not many people would miss you. A.D. End of section. Exchange with the editors of the Pall Mall Gazette, September 1894, from the Bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Ethics of Journalism. To the Editor of the Pall Mall Gazette. Sir, will you allow me to draw your attention to a very interesting example of the ethics of modern journalism, a quality of which we have all heard so much and seen so little. About a month ago Mr. T.P. O'Connor published in the Sunday Sun some doggerel verses entitled The Shamrock, and had the amusing impertinence to append my name to them as their author. As for some years past all kinds of scurrilous personal attacks have been made on me in Mr. O'Connor's newspapers, I determined to take no notice at all of the incident. Footnote. In a review of Intentions in the Sunday Sun, May 17, 1891, page 1, has everybody seen this mad, mustardy-coloured thing of Oscar Wilde's? At worst, Mr. Wilde's intentions may go to pave some Philistine hell. End footnote. Enraged, however, by my courteous silence, Mr. O'Connor returns to the charge this week. He now solemnly accuses me of plagiarizing the poem he had the vulgarity to attribute to me. This seems to me to pass beyond even those bounds of coarse humour and coarser malice that are, by the contempt of all, conceded to the ordinary journalist, and it is really very distressing to find so low a standard of ethics in a Sunday newspaper. I remain, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. September 18th. The following reply appeared in the Pall Mall Gazette, September 22nd, page 3. To the Editor of the Pall Mall Gazette. Sir, Mr. Oscar Wilde's letter in your issue of yesterday calls for a few words of explanation from me. Let me in the first place say that we regret exceedingly the suggestion of plagiarism. The story of the association of Mr. Wilde's name with the poem is a curious and perplexing one. Our own part in the matter is, however, easily explained. Some 3 months ago one of our correspondents sent to us in manuscript a poem entitled The Shamrock. The name Oscar Wilde was appended to it. Accompanying the poem was a letter in which our correspondent said, I have copied this poem on the Shamrock from an old Irish newspaper which I happened on by accident. It is so beautiful, and its sentiment is so fine and tender, that it came to me as a revelation. Oscar Wilde may be a flaneur and a cynic, but it is quite evident from this poem that deep down in his heart he has kept the fire of patriotism burning with something of a white purity. I think the poem is one which the Weekly Sun might well rescue from oblivion. This, then, sir, was the way in which we came to give the poem publicity in the Weekly Sun, and this the spirit in which the name of the elegant ornament of polite society came to be connected with it in our pages. Mr. Oscar Wilde places our ascription of the poem to himself on the level of certain scurrilous attacks which haunt his imagination. The suggestion is characteristic. I am not concerned here to defend the poem. It may be, and doubtless is, assailable, but even the most fastidious critic cannot deny that it is full of melodic charm and breathes a spirit of pure and exalted patriotism. So conspicuous, indeed, was its elevation of tone, that we were reluctant to believe it could have been the product of a mind like Mr. Oscar Wilde's, and were driven to take refuge in the charitable belief that it belonged to the period of a forgotten and generous youth. Faithfully yours, the Assistant Editor. Weekly Sun Offices, Tudor Street, EC, September 21st. In that week's issue of the Weekly Sun, September 23rd, 1894, was published a letter from a correspondent in Cork, stating that the real author of the poem was a blind girl named Helena Callanan, an inmate of the Cork Blind Asylum. From this letter it appeared that the Shamrock was first published in the Cork Weekly Herald about 1881, and that it had been copied into various American papers, and eventually found its way into an anthology called Gathered Leaflets, or Scattered Leaflets, in 1885, under the heading of the Cork Blind Asylum Poem. A summary of the controversy is given in the London letter of the Critic, New York, October 13, 1894. Wilde's second letter, Pall Mall Gazette, September 25th, was as follows. The Ethics of Journalism. To the Editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, Sir, the Assistant Editor of the Sunday Sun, on whom seems to devolve the arduous duty of writing Mr. T. P. O'Connor's apologies for him, does not, I observe with regret, place that gentleman's conduct in any more attractive or more honourable light by the attempted explanation that appears in the letter published in your issue of to-day. For the future, it would be much better if Mr. O'Connor would always write his own apologies. That he can do so exceedingly well, no one is more ready to admit than myself. I happen to possess one from him. The assistant editor's explanation, stripped of its unnecessary verbiage, amounts to this. It is now stated that some months ago, somebody, whose name, observe, is not given, forwarded to the office of the Sunday Sun a manuscript in his own handwriting, containing some fifth-rate verses with my name appended to them as their author. The assistant editor frankly admits that they had grave doubts about my being capable of such an astounding production. To me, I must candidly say, it seems more probable that they never for a single moment believed that the verses were really from my pen. Literary instinct is, of course, a very rare thing, and it would be too much to expect any true literary instinct to be found among the members of the staff of an ordinary newspaper. But had Mr. O'Connor really thought that the production, such as it is, was mine, he would naturally have asked my permission before publishing it. Great license of comment and attack of every kind is allowed nowadays to newspapers, but no respectable editor would dream of printing and publishing a man's work without first obtaining his consent. Mr. O'Connor's subsequent conduct in accusing me of plagiarism, when it was proved to him on unimpeachable authority that the verses he had vulgarly attributed to me were not by me at all, I have already commented on. It is perhaps best left to the laughter of the gods and the sorrow of men. I would like, however, to point out that when Mr. O'Connor, with the kind help of his assistant editor, states, as a possible excuse for his original sin, that he and the members of his staff took refuge in the belief that the verses in question might conceivably be some very early and youthful work of mine, he and the members of his staff showed a lamentable ignorance of the nature of the artistic temperament. Only mediocrities progress. An artist revolves in a cycle of masterpieces, the first of which is no less perfect than the last. In conclusion, allow me to thank you for your courtesy in opening to me the columns of your valuable paper, and also to express the hope that the painful exposé of Mr. O'Connor's conduct that I have been forced to make will have the good result of improving the standard of journalistic ethics in England. I remain, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. Worthing, September 22nd. End of section. To Ada Levison, from the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 327. Autograph letter signed, 4 pages. Duodecimo, no place nor date. To Mrs. Levison, signed Oscar. My dear, sweet, kind friend, I have no words to thank you for all you do for me, but for you and Ernest, Bosie and I have deepest love. I hope to be in better spirits tonight. Your sweetness last night was wonderful. Your flowers are like him. You're sending them like yourself. You are good and gentle and wonderful always. Lot 328. Autograph letter signed, 4 pages, octavo, no place nor date. To Mrs. Levison, signed Oscar. Dear Sphinx, of course you have been deeply wronged, but there are many bits not unworthy of your brilliant pen, and treachery is inseparable from faith. I often betray myself with a kiss. Hitchens I did not think capable of anything so clever, etc. End of section. To the editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, from the bibliography of Oscar Wilde by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Green Carnation. To the editor of the Pall Mall Gazette. Sir, kindly allow me to contradict, in the most emphatic manner, the suggestion, made in your issue of Thursday last, and since then copied into many other newspapers, that I am the author of The Green Carnation. I invented that magnificent flower, but with the middle-class and mediocre book that usurps its strangely beautiful name, I have, I need hardly say, nothing whatsoever to do. The flower is a work of art. The book is not. I remain, sir, your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. Worthing, 5 Esplanade, October 1st. End of section. To Lord Alfred Douglas, from Some Letters from Oscar Wilde to Alfred Douglas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Letter 13. 16 Tite Street, S.W. My dearest Bosie, I suppose you won't come up now, it is so late. Perhaps I shall hear tomorrow. I can't bear your sadness and unhappiness, because I cannot cure it. But you know what a joy it will be to see you again. I have been staying at Canizaro from Saturday to Monday. Noel Holland, one of Knatsford's sons, was there. He is partner with Edward Arnold, the publisher. I told him of our idea of writing a book, how to live above one's income, for the use of the sons of the rich. He was charmed. He seems very mad, but is quite brilliant. One of the Ameses with his fiancée was there also. There were many affectionate inquiries after you. Tiny was sweet as usual. Mrs. Schuster had a black eye, a fall from her donkey chaise. She was swathed in lace, jewels, and flowers, quite extraordinary to look at. I heard all the details of the divorce of the Scarlet Marquis the other day. Quite astonishing. Arthur Pollen told me all about it. He came to tea one afternoon. Surely your mother intends to give you a good allowance now. When she is a little better, I feel certain she will. It should be about £400 or £500 a year. It is absurd you should not have an allowance suitable to your position. I think you should speak to your mother about it before you come up. On Thursday night I am going to the first night of Tree's new play, so if you are in town I suppose you will dine with Robbie or some other friend. I am sending you a copy of Hafiz, the divinest of poets. I hope the honey of his verse may charm you. London is dripping with rain, a loathsome day. Ever with much love, yours, Oscar. Letter 14. A.C. Albemarle Club. My dearest boy, I have been very lonely without you, and worried by money matters. Today is golden enough, but rain has dripped monotonously on all other days. I went to Haddon Chambers' play. It was not bad, but, oh, so badly written. The bows and salutations of the lower orders who thronged the stalls were so cold that I felt it my duty to sit in the royal box with the Ribblesdales, the Harry Whites, and the Home Secretary. This exasperated the wretches. How strange to live in a land where the worship of beauty and the passion of love are considered infamous. I hate England. It is only bearable to me because you are here. Last night I supped at Willis's. There were respectful inquiries after Lord Douglas. Always yours, Oscar. End of section. To Ada Leveson, from the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 326. Autograph letter signed, 1 page, octavo. Hotel Albemarle, Piccadilly. To Mrs. Leveson. Signed, Oscar. Dear Sphinx, you are more than all criticisms. I have merely to thank you again and again for your desire to sound in my honour a daffodil-shaped horn. Elder Harris is, of course, a traitor, but sphinxes are true. End of section. To Ada Leveson, from the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 329. Autograph letter signed, 4 pages, duodecimo. No place nor date. To Mrs. Leveson. Signed, Oscar. Dear Sphinx, your aphorisms must appear in the second number of the Chameleon. They are exquisite. The Priest and the Acolyte is not by Dorian, though you are right in discerning by internal evidence that the author has a profile. He is an undergraduate, etc. End of section. To Ada Leveson, from the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 324. Autograph letter signed, 4 pages, octavo, London, no date. To Mrs. Leveson. Signed, Oscar. Dear Sphinx, oh, how rash of you to trust me with your brilliant article. I had put it into a casket and thrown the key into the waters, but now I have shattered the casket and send you the purple papyrus of your perfect panegyric. I hope it will be published, etc. End of section. To Ada Leveson, from the Catalogue of the Stetson Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lot 321. Autograph letter signed, 4 pages, octavo, Hotel Avondale, Piccadilly, no date. To Mrs. Leveson. Signed, Oscar. My dear Sphinx, you were kind enough to say I might bring someone to dinner tonight. I have selected a young man, tall as a young palm tree. I mean tall as 2 young palm trees. His Christian name is Tom, a very rare name in an age of Algies and Berties. I met him on Tuesday, so he is quite an old friend, etc. End of section. To Lord Alfred Douglas, from Some Letters from Oscar Wilde to Alfred Douglas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Letter 15. Dearest Boy, Yes, the Scarlet Marquis made a plot to address the audience on the first night of my play. Algy Burke revealed it, and he was not allowed to enter. He left a grotesque bouquet of vegetables for me. This, of course, makes his conduct idiotic, robs it of dignity. He arrived with a prize fighter. I had all Scotland Yard, 20 police, to guard the theatre. He prowled about for 3 hours, then left, chattering like a monstrous ape. Percy is on our side. I feel now that, without your name being mentioned, all will go well. I had not wished you to know. Percy wired without telling me. I am greatly touched by your rushing over Europe. For my own part, I had determined you should know nothing. I will wire to Calais and Dover, and you will, of course, stay with me till Saturday. I then return to Tite Street, I think. Ever with love, all love in the world, devotedly yours, Oscar. End of section. To Robert Ross, from the Catalogue of the Dallow Collection. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 3. The letter from the Hotel Avondale, 1 page, quarto. Dearest Bobby, since I saw you, something has happened. Bosie's father has left a card at my club, with hideous words on it. I don't see anything now but a criminal prosecution. My whole life seems ruined by this man. The Tower of Ivory is assailed by the foul thing. On the sand is my life spilt. I don't know what to do. If you could come here at 11:30, please do so tonight. I mar your life by trespassing ever on your love and kindness. I have asked Bosie to come tomorrow. Signed, Oscar. End of section. To the editor of the Evening News, 5th of April, 1895. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Letter from Wilde. He gives his reasons for closing the case. The Evening News has received the following letter from Oscar Wilde, written on the notepaper of the Holborn Viaduct Hotel. To the editor, it would have been impossible for me to have proved my case without putting Lord Alfred Douglas in the witness box against his father. Lord Alfred Douglas was extremely anxious to go into the box, but I would not let him do so. Rather than put him in so painful a position, I determined to retire from the case, and to bear on my own shoulders whatever ignominy and shame might result from my prosecuting Lord Queensberry. Oscar Wilde. End of section. End of Letters of Oscar Wilde, Volume 2, 1890 to 1895.